This is BBC One. The 6 o'clock news now with Justin Webb in Hong Kong and Martyn Lewis in London.
Good evening. Hong Kong belongs once again to China. The colony was handed back just an hour ago at midnight Hong Kong time. At the end of a night of solemn ceremonies, the Union Jack was lowered for the last time. Chinese troops are already in Hong Kong. The Chinese have promised that the soldiers will stay off the streets.
The main news here, British Airways ground staff have voted by 2 to 1 to go on strike. The airlines warned its staff that industrial action could put their jobs at risk. And the Home Secretary is setting up a new investigation into the Hillsborough disaster.
One of the greatest chapters of colonial history came to an end tonight. Hong Kong, the last significant part of what was the British Empire, was reunited with China. In the end, the handover went smoothly, with both sides sounding conciliatory notes. Tony Blair called for a strong and stable relationship between Britain and China. The Chinese president promised Hong Kong would remain free, and he invited Mr. Blair to visit China. Mr. Blair has accepted and is likely to go next year. At the end of an evening of spectacular events, the British and Hong Kong flags were lowered and the Chinese flag raised. An advance group of Chinese troops was already on its way into Hong Kong. The main body will follow later tonight. Our Asia correspondent Fergal Keane reports.
The long goodbye is over. 1 hour ago, Hong Kong ceased to be a British colony. A century and a half of imperial rule ended with the lowering of the Union flag. At midnight, Hong Kong became, once again, part of China. This most singular of days began with the most typical of Hong Kong summer weather, heat and the promise of rain. And yet the rain was but a mild distraction, for as the last governor left his residence, the sense of occasion, of emotion, was palpable. This was a moment he had long prepared for, and yet when the last post was sounded, Governor Chris Patton struggled to contain his feelings. The governor is a lover of the pipes, and this Highland Cathedral his favourite tune. The house and the city he must leave, but the flag that is his personal standard travels home with the last governor. His daughters watched, captivated by the moment of history. As the governor left, he held to an old tradition, driving 3 times around the house. It is a Chinese tradition, a promise that says, "I will return." And so the gates closed and the policemen prepare themselves to serve new masters. The house will become a museum. Within an hour, the new rulers had arrived. President Jiang Zemin of China came with promises that Hong Kong's freedoms would be protected. He's the first Chinese head of state to set foot in Hong Kong in 156 years. For the departing British, though, it was not a retreat, but a proud march homewards. Now, said Governor Patton, it was time for Hong Kong people to seize their own future.
it has been the greatest honor and privilege of my life to share your home for 5 years and to have some responsibility for your future. Now, Hong Kong people are to run Hong Kong. That is the promise, and that is the unshakable destiny.
After that, emotion could no longer be contained. It was Queen Victoria who ruled when Britain seized Hong Kong. Tonight her descendant helped to give it back.
Unprecedented though this moment in history may be, we have the utmost confidence in the abilities and resilience of the Hong Kong people. Britain learnt long ago that Hong Kong people know best what is good for Hong Kong.
And then the skies exploded with noise and colour. The last rites of the British era have been performed. The illuminations you see in the sky behind me are a last gesture of farewell. Although the British Empire ended in any real sense more than a generation ago, there is here tonight a sense of echoes of past greatness. Waiting silently on the border, the People's Liberation Army of China. The convoy moved into Hong Kong 3 hours before the handover. 4,000 more will join them tomorrow. In Hong Kong's Grand Convention Centre, shortly before the handover ceremony got underway, the Chinese leadership invited Britain's Prime Minister to visit Beijing. As China raised its flag over Hong Kong, it was the clearest signal yet that both sides want to put past bitterness behind them. Minutes ago, the Prince of Wales and Governor Patton boarded the Royal Yacht Britannia, preparing to sail away from Hong Kong. They leave behind them a city that began as a barren settlement, the most improbable of all Britain's imperial adventures, but the one which became the Empire's brightest prize.
It was just over 20 minutes ago that the Royal Yacht Britannia slipped away from the quayside here at Hong Kong Harbour and made her final journey out of that harbour. As with all the events today, it was done with split-second precision. Prince of Wales and Hong Kong's last governor, Chris Patton, on board. Prince of Wales had pledged earlier that Britain would not forget the people of Hong Kong and would watch, as he put it, with closest interest as they embarked on what he called this new era of remarkable history. And with that, the Royal Yacht took the last British official presence away from Hong Kong. In Beijing, 100,000 invited guests packed Tiananmen Square for the Chinese government celebration. The streets outside the official party were packed with people carrying flags. The communist government sees the return of the colony as the end of a chapter of shame in the history of China. From Beijing, Kate Adie.
While Hong Kong reflected solemnly, on the stroke of midnight, Beijing's sky burst with colour. There are over 100,000 people in the square, and yet for all the pageantry and noise, the long-awaited moment brought no great spontaneous joy. Factory units, school children, farmers and state industry workers all were given the privileged tickets to Tiananmen Square, and all seemed quite impressed. But it was hardly an outpouring of emotion. The celebrations had been carefully planned. The reunification ceremony was to be carried out in an organized and orderly manner, in the tradition of the older generation and reminiscent of many a communist gathering. The There was heavy security, police and plainclothesmen thick on the ground, and 16-year-olds given the task of standing in rigid lines, fencing off the various entertainments. This is the dream come true for the Chinese government. They believe it washes away a century of humiliation. It's being hailed as a triumph for the Communist Party, and celebration is very much the order of the day. Organized and ordered, if not effusive, but many individuals genuinely welcomed back the former colony. It makes us very, very happy. We've been waiting for this a very long time. We're together again with Hong Kong. A curious atmosphere, a triumph of organization, and overall a political triumph for the Chinese government. Kate Adey, BBC News, Beijing.
Here in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Democratic Party called a rally to coincide with the handover. 200 or 300 supporters gathered outside the building where the elected Legislative Council used to meet. The council has been disbanded by the Chinese. Just after midnight, the leader of the Democratic Party, Martyn, came out onto the balcony of the Assembly building and addressed those demonstrating in the square below. And our correspondent, Alan Little, is at the building now. Alan, so Mr. Lee was allowed to have his protest?
Yes, he was allowed to have his protest, and although the demonstration that greeted him was quite exuberant, there are no more than a few hundred people here, as you say, and in a city of 6 million, that has to be judged not very impressive. So Mr. Lee was allowed to go into the building through the front doors, despite the original intention of the new authorities here to outlaw pro-democracy demonstrations on a night that was supposed to be for reunification celebrations. He's been allowed to go ahead. He said from the beginning that he intended never to use force, nor to provoke force by the new authorities, but simply to have his gesture of defiance, if you like, in peace, and then peacefully dispersed. And that appears to be what is happening now.
Yes, this was a gesture, wasn't it, this evening? This was not in any sense an orchestrated challenge to the new authorities here.
Not at all. It was a gesture of defiance nonetheless, and a declaration of intent. Mr. Lee is saying in no uncertain terms that as far as he's concerned, the fight only just begins now. He wants to democratize the whole of China. And it's an important point to make, I think, that the democratic opposition here are not against the reunification of China. They say repeatedly in the speeches that are going on behind me that the Hong Kong people are proud to be Chinese. What they want, though, is a democratic China.
Alan Little, thank you. And there'll be more from Hong Kong later on in the programme. For the moment, it's back to London and to Martyn.
And in the rest of tonight's programme, British Airways ground staff are threatened with a sack after voting to strike. The Home Secretary announces another inquiry into the Hillsborough Soccer Stadium disaster. And disappointment for Monica Seles. The number 2 seed is knocked out of Wimbledon.